Good afternoon, and welcome to the Shareholder Equity Conference, Energy and Industrial version. This afternoon, I am pleased to have Steve Young, Executive Vice President and CFO of DUK Energy, joining me for our conversation. The format's going to follow similar conferences. We'll start it off, and I'll turn it over to Steve for opening comments, and then we'll go through some prepared Q&A, and then we'll open it up live to the audience. As a reminder, audience, if you look on the showcase, you'll see a Q&A button at the top. If you press that, you can enter your question in and it'll come directly to me and I will pass it on to the management team. So without further ado, I'm pleased to turn it over to Steve Young. Steve?
Thank you very much, Dan. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here. Let me kick it off by giving an overview of DUK Energy. DUK Energy is a large-scale regulated energy infrastructure business. We run complementary energy businesses, gas and electric in the Southeast and Midwest areas of the United States. We own very strong franchises in very good economic growth areas. We're very excited about that business. We also have a commercial renewables business that is one of the top commercial renewable solar wind developers in the nation. So it is a great combination of businesses that we're very excited about. When you think about what do these businesses provide, when you put these businesses together, they produce about a 10% annual total shareholder return. We've got about 4% dividend yield. I know how important the dividend is to all of our investors. I'll talk about that in a moment, but we've got a 4% dividend yield roughly, and then we've got 5 to 7% earnings growth rate. And we have a terrific growth profile across our businesses. Now, again, let's think about these businesses a bit here. We've got electric utilities in Florida, the Carolinas, and in the Ohio, Northern Kentucky area, and in Indiana. Particularly the Southeast utilities see tremendous growth, tremendous expansion of population, and all of these people need energy infrastructure needs. We also have gas distribution businesses in the Carolinas, in the Nashville, Tennessee area, which has been growing gangbusters, and in the greater Cincinnati area, which has also been growing well. So we have a tremendous deep history across these businesses, tremendous operational capabilities, tremendous deep stakeholder relations with key people in the state, local, federal, that know our business and understand the value that we bring to the local economies. So these businesses, why do these businesses foresee such good growth? Last February in our earnings call, we laid out a 5-year capital plan, and that's how we grow, is building energy infrastructure. It was nearly $60 billion of infrastructure that we expect to build over the next 5 years. And we see a couple of fronts. Where does this come from? Number one, we have tremendous needs to modernize the energy infrastructure in the country as a whole, certainly across our footprint. And let's think about this. Our objective, our strategy is to transform the energy profile of our businesses. And what that basically means and talks about is decarbonizing, retiring coal plants and replacing them with renewables, battery storage. The second leg is our grid. That's poles, wires, meters. That needs to be modernized with new technology to accommodate the renewables and to give better service under the storms and types of disruptions that we face. So these are tremendous investment opportunities for us over the next 10 years, give us very good growth. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, Florida and the Carolinas in particular see great organic growth. They are becoming migration in states, and we've seen that accelerate during the recent COVID situation. We've had a number of good fronts across our regulatory jurisdictions and with our stakeholders. Building all this infrastructure requires great stakeholder involvement. We've seen legislation pass in North Carolina that incents us to accelerate the decarbonization of our generation fleet, meaning that we need to retire coal units and replace them with renewables. It's a great investment opportunity. We've seen legislation in Indiana and Florida and the Carolinas as well to promote and accelerate investment in modernizing the energy grid that moves all of this electricity around. So we're taking advantage of these opportunities. We are well engaged with our stakeholders. We are well aligned. So again, just to wrap up, when you put these opportunities together, you're looking at 10% total shareholder return and a strong dividend yield of nearly 4%, which I know is important to retail investors. So I'd kind of conclude the opening part with that, Dan.
It's a great overview of the business. So why don't we start with where you ended, which was your value proposition to investors with that kind of embedded 10% return. So can you talk a little bit more about the growth drivers, through the next couple of years, and how you're going to get there?
Right. I think specifically when we look at the growth drivers, on the electric side, we've got very clear, succinct investment plans across our footprint. In Florida, we just had a 3-year rate settlement and investment settlement with the regulators in Florida, where we're going to be investing $5 billion over the next 3 years in grid and renewable investments in Florida. And we're going to have automatic step-ups in rates to recover those costs appropriately. In Indiana, we are concluding a 7-year grid investment profile, and we're filing the next 7-year grid investment profile. The one we're wrapping up was nearly $1.5 billion of investment. We'll make at least that amount, we believe, in the next filing for grid investments. I mentioned legislation in North Carolina. That legislation requires us to reduce our carbon footprint in North Carolina by 70% by 2030. So we're going to begin planning the retirement of coal units and the replacement with renewables, battery storage, some gas units, some gas turbines as well. And that will result in significant replacement investment opportunities for us. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, we've got people just moving in our service territories. In the Carolinas, the gas business in Nashville, Florida, and they're going to need energy infrastructure. So we see organic or natural growth as well.
Perfect. So why don't we stay with that theme? Let's talk a little bit about the transition to clean energy. That's obviously a key tenet for you guys. You mentioned multiple factors on why you're doing that. Obviously the retail investors care deeply, about ESG efforts, and you guys are doing a great effort there. So can you talk a little bit about where you are in that journey and the results you've been able to see so far?
Absolutely. Our business strategy is to transform the energy industry and our businesses. And we put forth our goals. We intend to reduce our carbon footprint from 2005 levels, and that's the anchor year from the Paris Accords, from 2005 levels by 50% by 2030. By 2050, we intend to be net zero and have basically displaced all of our carbon output. So those are long-range plans, but they're necessary when you're building energy infrastructure. And again, we're well aligned with a lot of stakeholders here on this front. But we start out with the broad plans, and then we start working with each of our businesses and all the stakeholders involved, customers, regulators, legislators. And then you start getting the rules and laws passed to help you do that. In Florida, I mentioned, we've got a 3-year rate plan that we've just put in, that we've just settled. We've also got legislation that incents investment in grid and renewables. The North Carolina law I mentioned goes out to 2030 and anticipates many investments, opportunities in replacing coal with other facilities. The Midwest is starting with grid investments, both in Ohio and in Indiana. And we're just now making filings and having discussions about replacement of Indiana coal. So that'll be another opportunity coming to us over the next 5 to 10 years as well. But every state has its own cadence, but it's well aligned with our overall strategy.
So let's dive deeper on kind of one of the components there with the clean energy transition. And it's really more of a theme, right? I think a lot of people can relate to, and that is just the growth of electric vehicles. And so can you kind of tell us, what are the opportunities for utility like Duke there? Obviously today, electric vehicles are only, I think, at less than 3 or 4% penetration, as a whole in the United States. So would love just to kind of hear how that plays into your strategy.
It is an important part of the strategy. You're right, the penetration's low but we're starting to get to that inflection point. And we are starting to see actual impacts in our 5-year plan, particularly in the 4 and 5 years, where there's meaningful contribution from electricity sales to electric vehicles. We're starting to see people get comfort with chargeability. And we're not just anticipating this coming to us, we're helping across our footprint. We're building charging stations in virtually every utility that we've got. And that's investment that we can put into our investment base to earn on. Additionally, you're increasing the usage of electricity. And it's very efficient usage because it's typically off peak. I own an electric vehicle, I charge at night. And that's the perfect time to charge when other consumption areas are lower. So it doesn't cause us to build new resources. We can serve that load out of our existing fleet of resources. So it's very efficient growth. But again, we're working with our regulators to build charging stations. We're also partnering with industrial customers and municipalities. We have arrangements with local cities, municipalities to electrify city bus fleets. We have an arrangement with automobile manufacturers to be a preferred consultant as businesses look to transition their fleet of vehicles, service vehicles, delivery vehicles. We'll help them plan the infrastructure needed to be able to bring the vehicles in at night, charge them, get them ready to roll the next day. So we've got a number of efforts across our footprint, both building infrastructure, helping customers build infrastructure in their own facilities. And I think this is going to take off over the next decade.
Yeah, I definitely would agree. I'm actually looking at purchasing an electric vehicle sometime next year. Unfortunately, I think it's going to be like 6 months before it can be delivered.
I know they are having challenges with that.
So going back to a comment you made about investment in the grid, so you guys are obviously one of the largest operators, in the U.S. Can you talk about some of those investments, how they relate to safeguarding those assets that are obviously critical infrastructure to the U.S., both from a physical safeguarding aspect and cybersecurity?
Yes, let's start with the physical side on the grid. Technology has advanced, particularly in the last 10 years. It's amazing what you can do. You can put software technology out on the grid, for example, on a transformer, and it can detect when a transformer is starting to overheat, and it can automatically shift load, electricity, to other parts of the system to relieve that particular facility from overheating. That type of technology just didn't exist a generation ago, certainly. So we're putting that type of capability out there. That's going to reduce maintenance costs. It's going to reduce outages, obviously. We're also putting technology where customers can talk to us, and we can talk to customers, and we can tell them where there are outages in their area, when we expect the power to come back. That reduces the calls into the call center. And there's just plain old storm hardened poles and wires and meters. There's better equipment that is more resistant to extreme weather, whether it's winds from hurricanes or whether it's snow and ice that we get in the Midwest. So all of those investments are being strategically planned and put into place. And we've been doing this now for at least 5 years. And there's a long tailwind of investments, rather, that we can make there. So that's on the physical side, things you can think about right there. We've got to protect our assets from cyber attacks. We've seen what happened with Colonial Pipeline, and we've seen other industries where there's been cyber attacks. We're not invulnerable either. And we've been investing heavily in this area. We've got any number of firewalls. We've stood up a 24/7 cyber center. We've got software analytics that analysts are looking at all the time to determine what's going on across our system. We have frequent communications with the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and with our peers in the industry. So there's a tremendous amount of conveyance there. We do desktop drills all the time in our industry and within our own company. What happens if this facility broke down? Or what happens if we had a cyber problem with a key supplier of parts? And then we look at those results and we develop redundancies where needed. We'll develop an ability to isolate where a problem is and then get a backup system in place. So these are examples of the investments that we've made on the cyber side to protect the bulk electric grid and the gas distribution grid, because energy is so critical to people, and we understand that.
All right, perfect. So we're going to transition a little bit. We've got a couple questions coming in from the audience. This one's high level. I mean, you've touched on it a little bit, obviously, with the CapEx commitments that you've made. But can you give a little bit more detail on what your philosophy is, with capital allocation? How you think about growing the dividend over time. How do you think about buybacks and the decisions to allocate capital between the two?
Sure, absolutely. We have gotten our business portfolio in a really good position here, where we're virtually 100% regulated energy infrastructure. Utility franchises, again, Carolinas and Florida and the Midwest, and gas distribution franchises there. These are very low risk businesses, if you will. The investments are recovered through regulatory processes. We have deep experience in this area, and thus we've kind of got a low risk profile across our footprint. When we're looking at capital allocation, what we're doing here is number one, we've got to look at our franchises and say, what are we required to do to provide this very basic fundamental service? And we know very well how to do that. And we'll make sure that reliability and safety are first there. Beyond that, we'll look at what opportunities make the most sense in terms of what is the recoverability, what is the stakeholder alignment for these processes. And we have very good relations with the regulators and legislators, and we've put in place very good recovery mechanisms. So, and on capital allocation, right now we have a very robust capital profile. We will review all projects internally, very detailed. We will rate the projects in terms of compliance, safety, and then we'll rate recoverability. What do they do for the customer? Which projects are going to help reduce outages most? Which are going to improve reliability most? And then we'll rank all of these capital projects and prioritize them and lay out our plan. We will meet about twice a year and go through this because things can change. And we will adjust that priority for our capital based on that criteria. And we're constantly working with our regulators to get the right recovery mechanisms. Now, when you put that together, that provides a robust building program. And we then convert through the regulatory process those investments into revenue streams. We have a good record of getting good recovery on all of these costs. And that becomes the basis for the dividend. We've paid the dividend 95 consecutive years. We've grown the dividend 15 consecutive years. So we obviously know how to convert these investments into revenue, cash revenue streams, and then convert that into dividends. We look closely at our dividend payout ratio, our credit ratings. They're very strong. And we know how important the dividend is. Ultimately, our goal is to grow the dividend around our earnings trajectory. And so our projected earnings growth has been 5 to 7%, but we've got a lot of investment opportunities. So we're growing the dividend slightly lower than that currently, but we've got a long track record of growing that dividend. Ultimate goal is to grow it in the range of our earnings growth rate. Thanks.
All right, so next we're going to jump over to the government. And so there's obviously been a lot of talk, about bipartisan infrastructure frameworks, the Build Back Better plan. What's in one day is out the next. How do you guys think about that, and how will the plan ultimately have positive impacts for utilities like Duke?
Right. Let's talk about what's going on with the federal legislation in the two pieces. There was the infrastructure bill that's been passed, a little over $1 trillion. And this is going to be an important piece of legislation in that it provides a lot of funding that will help the energy industry as it transitions and lowers carbon. And it's going to put a lot of money towards research. And this is going to be necessary to get to net zero by 2050. We're going to need some advancements in technology, whether it's hydrogen or carbon sequestration or advanced battery storage or small modular nuclear. Those are all the things you hear about. And the infrastructure bill is going to align money there. We are well positioned to work on various projects along that spectrum of technologies and utilize some of those grants from the government to help us lower our costs and advance the infrastructure build. We've got pilots in hydrogen going on right now at a couple of universities. With a couple of universities, we're working with TerraPower on small modular nuclear. We have a number of battery projects on the drawing board and in operation across our footprint. I think battery technology is going to be very important to keep the grid stable. So the legislation provides funding that will help advance those technologies. We'll be very involved with that. The proposed legislation, the budget bill, the Build Back Better bill, which is yet to be passed, the main impact to us is on the tax side. That legislation has proposed tax amendments that would extend credits for renewables. That makes sense to us. We're in the renewables business. That will help lower the cost of the renewables for customers and help ease the transition out of coal. It also has rules about being able to turn these credits into cash quicker, and that will help lower the cost. It'll help us finance more efficiently. If we can build a resource, earn a tax credit, and then get that tax credit in the form of cash quicker, then we can build the next resource after that in a more efficient fashion. So we'll see how that legislation, the Build Back Better legislation, moves along. But that's the way I think about those two pieces right now. Both are going to be useful for Duke and what we're doing.
Okay. So let's switch gears a little bit to talk about some macro, really headwinds. And obviously, everybody's talked a lot about the supply chain and the ongoing issues that we still have there. You know, we've obviously seen a lot of volatility also in the commodities markets. So I'd love just to hear your thoughts on how that impacts you guys directly or indirectly, and also impacting your end customer.
Right. Let's start with the commodity markets. We obviously buy a lot of fuel for our coal plants and our gas plants to provide electricity. We buy a lot of natural gas to deliver in our gas distribution businesses. And the cost of those commodities has risen. And that's going to get passed through to customer bills over the next year. We saw this coming. We've been communicating very intensively with customers to warn them about the bills coming, to offer advice as to how to lower bills. We've been working with our regulators to help smooth out potential price increases. So there's been a lot of education with customers, and we've gotten good at this, frankly, because of COVID. Had a lot of communication with customers during the COVID situation about how to communicate with us, how to pay bills under duress. So we've utilized that here as we anticipate some commodity price increases. Additionally, one of the things that we've been doing on the commodity side is we've been hedging the natural gas prices to help mitigate these spikes. We also have criteria for buying forward firm physical contracts for coal and for natural gas. And those types of efforts help mitigate to some extent price increases that we're going to see. But nonetheless, there will be some price increases. We think our customers are prepared for that. On the supply chain side, just quickly here, this is where Duke Energy's scope and scale helps. Again, we're very large, and we utilize our footprint to help us gain some advantages here. We'll work with vendors to say, look, we have businesses in the Midwest and the Southeast. Let's try to find a level of business that we can lock in for a longer period of time to know we've got the security of the resources we need. It also helps the supplier to know that they've got a fixed stream of business that they're giving to us. So we typically utilize our supply chain capabilities, our scope and scale, to help mitigate some of the supply chain price issues that we've seen. Some of the constraint issues that we've dealt with in terms of actually getting materials, again, what we've done is use the scope of our warehousing and capabilities to load up on identified areas where we could see constraints coming and try to utilize that facility and that capability to move materials as needed across our broader footprint. Those are the kind of things that we're trying to do to mitigate those issues.
Got another one coming in from the audience. This one on M&A in particular. You obviously talked about your capital allocation priorities, but how do you think specifically about M&A, as we go forward to the next couple of years?
Right, right. We have built our portfolio of businesses and have been active in M&A over a broad period of time, the last 15 years. And that's helped us get us the body of businesses we like. But sitting here right now, we do not see M&A in our 5-year planning cycle. We've got a great organic growth plan, and organic capital is the best kind of capital to grow, the cheapest kind of capital to grow. And so right now, with our utilities in Southeast and Midwest, our footprint and the scope and scale we've got, we're satisfied with that. So we're not looking at M&A at this time.
Okay. Another question, can you talk a little bit about ways that you guys are enhancing your efficiency, customer service, and reliability?
Yes, I'm certainly excited about talking about that. Again, I would go back a bit to what technology can do here. And it's amazing to me. And this is focused, I think, more on the grid, the wires, meters, poles, those types of assets than anything there. And again, with reliability, if you've got storm hardened equipment, then it's going to be more resistant to high winds. And when you do have a big storm, you can get power back online quicker. Another technology that we've utilized, I think I alluded to this, is communication with customers. And this has really increased our customer satisfaction. Nowadays, people, when there's outages or reliability problems, it's not just that they want to know you're going to get power back. They want to know when. They want to hear from you. They want you to be proactive about communicating. And it's not enough to say, hey, everybody knows there was a hurricane. They know we're working on it. Let's put all of our focus on the engineering side. We've got to talk to people. And so we've greatly enhanced the use of texting capabilities, the use of website capabilities to immediately inform people, hey, there's an outage in your area. We estimated time of restoration is in 4 hours. So that might yield a certain set of plans. But if it's going to be 2 days, they may need to pack up and move to a relative's house or something of that nature. So that has really helped rise up the customer sat. The other technology I'd mention is now with smart meters, we can see when somebody's headed towards a problem bill. We used to not be able to see that. We read a meter on a certain date, and then we'd process it, send the bill out, and it would be quite a bit of time between the energy consumption and when they got a bill. But now we'll send out warning text to people. Consumption appears to be a bit high. You're headed for a high bill. Why don't you give us a call? So if there's a problem with payment of that nature, and let's work on it now. And those things have been greatly received. And that technology didn't exist, 5-10 years ago.
Yeah. All right, so we're getting toward the bottom of the hour. We got time for one more. So Steve, I'll ask you one more and then turn it back over to you for closing comments. And then I'm going to come back with a couple logistical comments as well. So from the audience, should growth-oriented investors look at your stock, and if so, why?
Oh, I think they should. When you think about the growth I just described, our investment base is growing 6.5% to probably north of 7% over the next decade, and that translates into the earnings base in a regulated business, and that is a solid long-term growth profile. The other thing I'd offer about this is that this is low-risk businesses. We're talking about regulated energy infrastructure where we have franchise rights. We've got franchise obligations, but we've been meeting those obligations for nearly a century. But these rights to serve in these areas, these very lucrative areas where population is growing naturally, I think really is attractive from a growth perspective.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us today. Steve, I'll briefly turn it back to you for any closing comments, and then I'll just come back with the next steps.
Sure, absolutely, Dan, and thank you for this opportunity again. It's been a pleasure to speak to you. I think we've covered it pretty well. We're very excited about where Duke Energy is. We've got a great energy transition strategy that is in action. and it has a long, good growth rate. We've got a terrific history of operations and a great financial history as well, and a tremendous growth and dividend profile. So with that, Dan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. And to the audience, just as a reminder, we have a 30-minute break before our next session that will begin promptly at 1:30. Thank you.